for joining Laura's Loquacious live stream. Today, I am thrilled to be joined by Ben Meyers, who is the accessibility expert that I know of, like foremost accessibility expert from in my world. So I'm very, very excited to be talking to you today about docs accessibility and maybe DevRel accessibility in general, if we have time.
Absolutely. It's great to be here. I certainly wouldn't call myself the preeminent accessibility expert. There is a thriving ecosystem of accessibility professionals that I'm constantly learning from. But yeah, so hi, I'm Ben. If it's all right, I could do a bit of an introduction as to who
Yes,
I am.
please.
Awesome. So I am a front-end developer. I've been in the industry about 5 years now. And for the past year, I've been working at Microsoft on Microsoft's developer documentation called Microsoft Learn, formerly known as Microsoft Docs, formerly known as MSDN. I'm an accessibility advocate. I blog about it. It's on hiatus right now, but I host a stream called Some Antics where I bring on guests from around web development and web design to teach me something about building great user experiences for the web in a hands-on way with a focus on accessibility and or core web technologies. So accessibility is a huge passion of mine, and I just really enjoy getting to chat with people about it and help people build better webs. And I see we've got a friend of mine, Stephanie Eccles, in the chat. Howdy, Steph. Good to see you.
Hi, Steph. Thank you for joining us. Okay, so I could ask you some specific questions, or if you want to give more of like an overview, I am equally good with either of those options.
Sure. So I think maybe the barest level surface, like barely scratching the surface overview might help to start, just
Sure.
mainly because I think accessibility is such a huge subject, right? Like you and
Mm-hmm.
I today are not going to cover the entire scope of what accessibility means in,
For sure.
on the web, in documentation, in DevRel. Like we're going to be barely scratching the surface. But
Mm-hmm.
broadly speaking, the goal here is to build websites and web applications that are usable for disabled people. That's the goal of accessibility. The World Wide Web Consortium defines accessible websites as websites that are perceivable, operable, understandable, and robust. What perceivable means is that if there's information on the page, people can get to it. It's there, right? They can perceive it.
Mm-hmm.
Operable means you can use it. You're not stuck having to use a mouse, for instance. You could interact with it however you need, whether that be via a keyboard or a joystick, voice control, stuff like that, right? If there's stuff that you can use on the page, you can use it. That's operable. Understandable, which is where we're going to be spending a lot of time today, just means that you can understand the content and things on the site. It's intuitive, it's straightforward. And then robust means that you can access this regardless of what browser or assistive technology or device you were using, right? You can use the tools that work best for you. You're not like stuck in a given stack.
Mm-hmm.
So, broadly speaking, we're looking to bring all of those things to disabled users. And disabled users come in a myriad of experiences. Like every disabled person has their own experience.
For sure.
And so we're just broadly speaking trying to make sure that in the context of docs that they understand the content, they can access the content just as well as non-disabled people.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, and I think kind of one last thing in this overview here, this very very high level just umbrella thoughts about documentation accessibility. I think that there's kind of this very insidious assumption that the general public might need accessibility, but our internal employees, no, we're not too worried about that, right? We don't have any disabled employees. Or oh, this is technical documentation, right? These people are tech savvy, they don't have access needs, right? There's
Mm-hmm.
this sense that the more inner, I guess, you go. I don't know what the right preposition would be, but
Internal.
yeah. the more the closer you get to how the sausage gets made, the fewer access needs you're gonna have or whatever. We can kind of assume, right? And this leads to inaccessible internal tools, inaccessible documentation, a lot of that kind of stuff, because we're assuming that disabled people don't exist in those spaces when they totally do, right?
Mhm.
Which is what can lead to, a company might have an excellently accessible public facing site, and then you get to their wikis or their internal tooling and it's garbage. It's a dumpster fire.
Mhm.
So that, I think, is maybe the core thing to challenge before you go like any further into talking about like docs or DevRel accessibility, is that in these spaces, which might seem like a more closed ecosystem of
Mhm.
developers or internal like employees or whatever that means for you, like disabled people can be and are there and benefit, right? They exist in those spaces. So that's kind of the first thing to, I guess, really hit home, is
Yeah.
people do benefit.
Mhm. Mhm. I think, yeah, for sure. So I've had that experience, where of advocating for internal tooling,
Mhm.
to be accessible, like, meetings with transcripts and things like that. Like, okay, even if we assume correctly that, which is 2 assumptions, that none of our current employees, need this accessibility. Um, what are we actually designing for not being able to hire somebody who does, or that if we do hire somebody who does, their first few weeks are going to be all about bumping into all of these corners and then saying, "Hey, I bumped into this corner and we need to fix it." And that's not like an awesome onboarding experience.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, like your onboarding experience is so important. This is for employees. This is for anyone who's trying to use a product, right? The onboarding is so important, because it sets the tone, right?
Mhm.
It sets the tone for how you're going to engage with that system going forward, and it can tell you whether you're welcome or not, right? If your onboarding is an inaccessible experience, it's patently clear, blatantly clear that you're not welcome, or at
Mhm.
least you were not, the system was not designed to welcome you.
Right.
um
Right.
and yeah, as with like anything accessibility, when you have a system that incorporates accessibility from the get-go, it's so much easier to adapt for people's needs down the line. Whereas, if you don't build for accessibility early on, and then later you realize, oh, this is actually a need we have, you're going to try to bolt it on. And there's this metaphor. I'm so sorry. I forget who came up with this. I'm sure that it's out there. This is not mine, but it's like, um, you want, you bake some muffins, and then you realize they're supposed to be blueberry muffins, and so you try to like add blueberries in after the fact. Like, you can't do that. That's
Mhm.
not how that works. Like,
Mhm.
bolt-on accessibility is like trying to add in blueberries to the muffins after the fact, and that goes for any system. It goes for an individual website or web app. It goes for team and business practices. Like,
Right.
kludging in accessibility just isn't the way to go. You have to start with it. It has to be part of
Mhm.
your lifeblood from the get-go.
Right. Right. I love that analogy of adding in the blueberries after. I'm going to have to remember that.
Mhm. You know what? I'm going to, it's such a good metaphor that I'm going to actually Google it, because I want to make sure that whoever said it gets proper credit. Um, so I'm Googling that off to the side.
Mhm.
But yeah, so um, I think that this conversation is going to be super fascinating, in part because I when I'm thinking about documentation accessibility in my role, I'm thinking about it from a very meta level, where I don't
Mhm.
write the documentation. Hey Brent, good to have you here. I don't write the docs. I don't write Microsoft Docs. I kind of build the site that Microsoft Docs lives on. And so a big part of my role is making sure that like I'm helping technical writers be successful. And
Mhm.
Laura, correct me if I'm wrong, you're a technical writer. That's what you are by
I
trade.
am a technical writer. Yes. I'm a new technical writer. I was not a technical writer at this time last year. I was still a math professor, and so I am learning all the things sort of at the same time, learning the accessibility and the technical writing. But in that sense, it sort of works out that to be kind of the same as you were just saying, we're bringing in building the accessibility from the get-go instead of adding it on later, strictly because I am actually learning these things at the same time. And so the technical writing did not exist for me prior to the optimizing for accessibility mindset.
Absolutely.
Hi, Jay.
So yeah, Jay's here. Howdy, Jay. It's good to have you here. So, Laura, what are some things you want to know, or what I guess what are some of the concrete things you've picked up from your experience as a technical writer,
Mhm.
at like concerning accessibility? I feel like that's going to be a good springboard
Yeah,
for upcoming
yeah.
conversation.
I think I might share our my company's dogs here, and I can show some of the optimizations that I've made over the last few months. And so one of the first, really the first major contribution that I made to our docs, because our docs existed before I joined my company, which is Suborbital Software Systems. We are building the Suborbital extension engine, where which allows users to write their own extensions for your app. Sort of like a Zapier or if this then that, but in a much more robust kind of way. Like you can query your databases and things like that. And we use WebAssembly, which keeps all of the data really sandboxed and private. But this is not a suborbital live stream. That's just a little context for the docs that we're looking at, just because these are the docs that I have experience with.
Yeah,
Um, and so something that one of my coworkers had filed as an issue right around the time that I started was about accessibility, that our links were not optimized for accessibility. So things like we might have previously written this sentence, we're excited for you to give it a try and give us your feedback. We might have had that written as, um, please give us a try and send us your feedback. And there'd be like, click here to try or something. And so only the word here would be hyperlinked. And so then, of course, in for a screen reader user, if you were looking at a list of all the links on a page, you'd have one that just says here, which is not very informative at all about what exactly it is that you're clicking on. And even worse, if it's a really long page, you might have like 7 instances of here, 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 and they're all going to different here's, if that makes
absolutely.
sense. Yep. And so that was my sort of first big contribution to our docs, was going through every single page and making sure that our
Mhm.
links were informative and not uninformative. Well, that was kind of a letdown in that sentence, but
May I
anyway.
ask a question?
Mhm.
Did y'all do anything after encountering this bug and resolving it? Did y'all do anything to ensure that it doesn't happen again?
um, I don't know what that would be. So no.
That's totally fine, right? And I think that
Mhm,
this hits on something that I feel very strongly about in accessibility, which is that it's easy to think about accessibility in terms of like, oh, I'm just fixing these bugs that have been surfaced, but to be truly effective at accessibility, you have to treat it systemically, right? You have to come up with a system for basically ensuring that our docs authors can continue to be successful with putting out accessible content,
mhm.
so that we aren't constantly going back and fixing all the click here links, right?
Right.
And so in this case, for instance, one of the approaches that you might have is you might have a style guide for
Mhm,
like kind of technical content, like how do we write content? And one of the bullet points in that style guide, for instance, might be links should be descriptive, right?
right.
And that would be then baked into the review process, right? If you've
Mhm,
got a, s- it- I'm I'm assuming there's probably a process where someone reviews the documentation that
Mhm.
another author has contributed and approves it. This would now be a point where it's like, well, if you look at our style guide, we have this requirement that links aren't generic, links are descriptive.
Mhm. Right. Yep, that would make a lot of sense. I mean, basically what we're a very tiny, we're a little startup.
Mhm.
There are 13 of us. Actually, one of us is on a contract and that ends in a few weeks, and soon there will be 12 of us.
Sure.
And we're just like 15 months old or something. So um we don't have like our own style guide yet. What we have is like, for a style guide, look at Google's style guide and Microsoft's style guide and so on, and I'm sure those are in there.
Mhm.
The accessibility bullet points are in there, but it's not like, right, it's not embedded into the review process at
Mhm.
the moment. All of that lives in my head.
Right.
So I should get it out of my head and put it
I
in like a pull request template. That would make
I
sense.
I th- I think that would be good. I think
Mhm,
that documentation has a tendency to scale, right? And
mhm,
at a certain point, you start. I think that this is kind of an inherent point of documentation, right? Is that at a certain point you start bringing on new contributors.
right.
In some cases, for instance, working on Microsoft Learn, some of our contributors are open source contributors. They're not from within Microsoft. They're people who are just contributing to improve a product they use, improve its
Mhm,
documentation. Um, so we don't even always have the opportunity to, like, from a business perspective, be like, "Thou shalt do it this way," but rather we have to, like, as we scale, we have to formalize our practices in a way that, like, even outside contributors can
mhm.
benefit from.
Yep. Yep, that makes a lot of sense. Um, so that's one kind of optimization that I
Mhm.
have already implemented. I'm sure I have not done so perfectly. Um, but another type, because I think you asked like what kinds of things I had already done, right? Did I
Yeah, yeah, just kind of
okay.
what your experience with accessibility in docs and technical writing has been so
Mhm.
far.
Yeah, so that's really been the biggest one. The others, not specifically in docs, but on my own website, were about colors, of course, and
Mhm.
like color ratios, because I am more personally drawn to lighter colors, but the colors that I chose for my own website were the color ratios were not high enough, and so I had to adjust that. And those are pretty much the two biggest areas that I've or the two areas in which I have worked the most in terms of optimizing for accessibility. And then in sort of a fuzzier way, like you and I were talking right before we went
Mhm.
live about um, types of accessibility that are beyond that go beyond visual accessibility, that perceivability that you mentioned earlier,
Yeah.
that pertain more to the understandability, like for neurodiverse folks, for
Mhm.
instance. And I am one, I have ADHD. Um, and so for me, I had previously felt like our docs could be sort of overwhelming. And so this is, like we were saying before we started, it's a little bit harder to quantify. But breaking, for me anyway, my brain, it's easier if there's a table of contents on the
Yeah.
side so that I can sort of get a bird's eye view of what this is going to be looking like. And then have smaller sections instead of sections that go on for a really long time, breaking it down into smaller subsections, that kind of thing. But really, I'm optimizing for my own brain when I'm doing that. And it's harder to work out how to optimize for like
Mhm.
the greatest number of brains, if that makes
Yeah.
sense.
Cognitive disability is such a huge conversation in general, cognitive accessibility. Um, and I think it is so prevalent when talking about documentation because the goal of documentation is to be understood. And cognitive disability and neurodivergence mean that we have additional work to be done when it
Mhm,
comes to being understood, right?
mhm,
Um, and as I'm looking at the suborbital docs that you have up, right,
mhm,
you're following a lot of what I understand to be the best practices, right? You've broken up your sentences into smaller sentences. Your
mhm,
paragraphs are small. You're using headings appropriately to chunk up the content. Um, in general, people with cognitive disabilities are likelier to have a tougher time with keeping track of very complex instructions
mhm.
or holding too many things in their brain at one time.
Right.
And so, yeah, you generally want uh, for your content to be understandable, right? You want to chunk it up into smaller pieces. Hey, Mike, good to have you here.
Oh,
Um,
yeah, I'm sharing my screen, and so I'm not seeing the
no,
comments,
you're
and so on
good.
my bad.
Um, we got lots of
Actually,
friends
oh,
here.
that just made me remember something else that, part
Yeah.
of my job is not just writing our docs, but also, working in our blog.
Mm,
And so I have an example, here of a post that I wrote for our blog, and so something that I had to learn as a technical writer, and I think that this applies to all brains, not just
mhm.
neurodivergent brains, but using bullet points a lot.
Yeah.
So anytime, like trying to make sure that it's like one step or one idea or one concept that can be like, if it can't be written as a single bullet point, that's
Mhm.
sort of a, or if it's like more than a sentence or a sentence and a half, then maybe it should be broken down into bullet points.
Yeah.
Um, which it makes it easier, even makes it easier to skim. And
Yeah.
especially if you're going back and forth, like this is a tutorial blog post. And so if you're working through this as a tutorial, then being able to go back and see, instead of having all of this in a paragraph and try to figure out where in the paragraph you left off,
Mhm.
having it in bullet points is really useful.
Absolutely. The wall of text is the thing you're trying to avoid, right? Like
Hmm.
walls of text are absolute slogs to get through.
Right.
Um, and they're especially painful if you have some form of cognitive or learning disability. Like reading disorders, for instance, like dyslexia, right? Like
Hmm.
those walls of text can be huge pain points. What we're
Right.
doing here is we're breaking content up into um, much smaller, easier to internalize chunks. Um, and that's doing a couple things, right? I mean, for one thing, every chunk is small enough to be easily understood. But for another, it's visually breaking up the page. It's keeping things distinct, right? You
Hmm.
have better segments that like it's easier to just like visually skim that way or to uh there's this concept of like signposting, right? Where especially if you have memory issues, for instance, it can be really helpful to have some sort of cue to tell you where you are in some content, right?
Hmm.
Headings are a great way to do that. Tables of contents are good ways to do that. Within the context of a larger site, breadcrumbs can be a way to handle that as well, right? But if you've got big old paragraphs that you can absolutely lose yourself in, you could literally lose yourself in them. You might, particularly if you have memory or focus issues, you might like lose track of what it is you were even looking into.
Hmm.
Uh, where you were in your understanding. Um, so bite-sized chunks make it easier to signpost where you are in a given piece of content. Um,
Yep.
yeah.
Absolutely.
Uh, yeah. Mayank also calls out typography is a big thing here, right? Like uh
Yes.
documentation, like getting the typography right is so important, right? Making sure you've
Hmm.
got a clean font. Um, have you heard much about what makes typography accessible?
No.
Okay. So there's been tons of studies on this, and there's a lot of I would call it misinformation, but it's the kind of thing that feels right when said out loud. But when you actually like look into it, like do actual studies on large um, like large subsets of people,
Mhm.
things don't always hold up. So there's tons of like misinformation, but like things that feel correct. But what we do know is that like one of the strongest indicators of a font being readable, as in aiding reading comprehension, which is the ending goal, right? It's
Mhm.
making sure that people are comprehending what's being said. One of the leading indicators is whether folks are familiar with the font. So fonts that are installed by default on people's systems will perform better in reading comprehension just because people have seen more of it.
Mhm.
So like if you do like kind of gauntlet readability comprehension competitions, fonts like Verdana will vastly outperform custom fonts. For
Mhm.
instance, uh, there's other things. Letter spacing and line spacing are two huge aspects of readability, especially for
Sure.
dyslexic people.
Mhm.
Um, on the internet, this is one of those things where there's conventional wisdom that's not always entirely backed up. Folks do tend to prefer sans serif fonts. And the readability group in the UK did a survey, and what they found was that like basically they ranked every like they ranked like 30 fonts basically in
Mhm.
terms of reading comprehension. And while the leaders of the pack were all sans serif fonts did perform all right relative to the whole pack. So it's like sans
Mhm.
serif might give you a slight advantage, but not as much as people say. Um,
Mhm.
and You might have heard of like dyslexic friendly fonts, and the science just doesn't back
Yes.
this up. The
Oh,
science just
no?
does not. No, some dyslexic people do prefer and will say that they benefit from like dyslexic friendly fonts like Open
Mhm.
Dyslexic, Dyslexie, or Comic Sans.
Mhm.
And by all means, like I'm not going to doubt them, but
Mhm.
yeah, those same studies about like readability found that overall, while folks might have felt more like they were like might have felt like those fonts were more readable for them, they actually scored lower in reading comprehension overall. So
Mm.
it's it really is much more individual than you'll hear in
Yeah.
those kinds of things. But
That really rings true to me. I have very strong aesthetic preferences, and if I don't like the look of the font that I am
yeah,
looking at, I'm going to be stopping and thinking about how much I hate this font. And so it's not that I
yeah,
can't read it, it's that I am stopping every other sentence and thinking, "Ah, I don't like it." Which isn't an
absolutely.
accessibility issue, it's perfectly accessible to me, but
Mhm.
it can be distracting, but we can't optimize. I don't certainly do not expect everybody to try to optimize for, things that Laura thinks looks
Yeah.
pretty. So, yeah.
So yeah, just in general, right? Like focus on using very familiar fonts. This is especially when you've got like big bits of prose like documentation.
Mhm.
Um, Using like that the body font is not the place to get clever or creative, right?
Sure.
Use boring fonts that folks are likely to be familiar with.
Mhm.
Focus on things like line spacing and letter spacing,
Mhm.
and that will massively help with typography.
Mhm. Oh, I'm seeing in the comments now. I it took my brain a minute to remember that I had specifically shared only a window instead of my entire screen, specifically so that I could split my screen, but I kind of forgot for a second. So now I can see the comments again, and it's the exact opposite for me. So, my uncle says that they feel that same way about light theme. For me, it's the other way. I hate dark themes. Um, so yeah, and so it's always nice
Mhm.
the option
Yeah,
to switch back and forth between light
I
or dark
feel
themes.
very strongly that it needs to be an option.
Hmm.
I even don't necessarily care when like sites figure like that they're smarter than you are, and they'll like tap into your like operating system settings without giving you the choice to like manually pick one or the other. Like
Mm-hmm.
operating system settings, I think should only ever be the default, and folks should have the option to like manually set on a per site
Hmm.
basis.
Hmm.
Um, but yeah, this is one of those things where it's like there's your your docs are trying to bring in as many people as possible who are going to have
Right.
different needs. Like some folks are going to be fatigued by light modes. Some folks are
Hmm.
going to be like fatigued by dark themes.
Right.
Um, there's a tweet from Ryan Florence, who's big in the React world, where he shows that like in his experience, like dark things, like he's got an astigmatism, and so anytime he sees like light text on a dark background, it gets a
Hmm.
bit of a halo, and that leads to like blurry text, right?
I
Um,
also have astigmatism, and I have
hmm,
wondered since I saw that tweet. Was that like yesterday or 2 days ago? It was just really recently, right?
I feel
Um,
like it was like a year ago or something.
oh,
We
okay.
might be
Well,
thinking of
somebody must
different
have
tweets.
boosted it. Maybe on
Mhm,
Mastodon. I think I saw it on Mastodon.
gotcha.
Um, but yeah, and then he'd written like a Medium article, I think it was,
Mm.
explaining how that works. I've wondered if that's why I tend to dislike dark modes, because I actually find them harder to read than light modes.
So, meanwhile, I've been finding that light modes are causing me extra strain, especially like when the sun starts going down. So I've been like
Hmm.
taking measures to like override site styles lately to like force
Hmm.
a dark mode on sites that don't natively have it, right?
Yep.
Folks have conflicting access needs.
Right.
And so there's this concept called universal design, which
Right.
is uh I feel like folks sometimes misunderstand it to like mean like one size fits all, but rather it's like you should be able to come up with the end site that you need, right? You should come up with like you should be able to have the site that you need that presents content in the way that you need and can use.
Hmm.
So that means allowing for theming and stuff like that, right? There's not going to
Hmm.
be one size fits all.
Right. I think I've mostly seen universal design referred to in terms of designing maybe
Mhm.
physical environments.
Yeah.
And I think that might be more of what this site is optimizing for.
Mhm.
But yeah, that's certainly also a thing. And yeah, and that's kind of what I aim for is
Mhm.
making this as accessible as possible to as many people as possible. And that I assume will be an ongoing process. Like I don't imagine we're ever done
Yeah, no,
accessibilizing.
it's a continuous evolution of things, right? Like
Hmm.
it's
Hmm.
progress over perfection. Also, hello, we've got Sarah Rainsberger. Sarah is on
Hi,
the
Sarah.
Astrodocs. And I
Right.
love the Astrodocs. I think that they're a strong example of documentation done right. That does a lot of the stuff of like breaking up content. Because if we circle back to like breaking up content, this isn't
Hmm.
just on a per page basis, right? It's like you can peel that back to a site-wide context. Um,
Hmm.
I think you and Jen recently were discussing the diataxis documentation system,
Right.
right? Do you
Hmm.
want to kind of briefly explain what
Yeah.
that is for folks who haven't seen that?
In fact, I will bring up the site. I think it's this URL eventually. Yeah. Okay. So this probably does the best job of visually explaining what the diataxis method is. It also has previously been referred to as the grand unified theory of docs. And so we have four different types of documentation. In this case, we've sort of laid them out as a quadrant. So we have tutorials and how-to guides and explanations and reference materials. And so tutorials and how-to guides are more in like practical steps sort of category, and then in the theoretical knowledge category we have
Mhm.
explanations and reference, and we can be either learning oriented or understanding oriented or task oriented or information oriented. And the idea behind the diataxis method is that um, as often as possible, up to and including all the time, our documentation should fall in exactly one of these categories and to not straddle more than one category. The way that I kind of approach this is like it's whenever possible, whenever I can, and it sort of serves as a test for me. If I
Mhm,
feel like I'm going to need to, like, if I can't decide whether a document belongs in one category or another, then that's sort of a signal to me to stop and reassess the content of that document and say, okay, am I trying to do too many things in this document? Should this be more than one document? Usually that is the answer is yes, and to split them up. Very occasionally, the
mhm.
answer is no, actually, this document is an exception to the diataxis guidelines.
You and I feel very similar here, right? Like
Mhm.
there if you read this webpage, it's like very keen, like you'll never straddle the line, right? And I don't know, never say never, right? But it to really, really put this in a nutshell, right? Um, it groups up kinds of documentation pages based on like in a way that helps you land on the purpose of the page and the scope of the page, right?
Mhm.
Um, and those things, it turns out, are super helpful in the field of cognitive accessibility because if you have one page that's trying to be all the things, it's going to get muddled. It's going to be confusing. It's not going to do a great job of like signposting where the user is or like why they're there or what they're trying to get out of it because that page doesn't know, right?
Mhm.
Um, and so, scoping down your page or being very clear about the intent of a given page helps folks with especially cognitive disabilities or learning disabilities better orient themselves to where they are in the greater documentation. What are they going to get out of this page? Right? They're not going to
Mhm.
lose themselves in it. Um,
Mhm.
any opportunity you give someone to lose themselves in your documentation is an opportunity where they will take you up on that offer. They will get lost, right?
For
And
sure.
this is exacerbated by neurodivergence. Um,
Mhm.
so, yeah, breaking up your pages into pages that have a much more clearly defined purpose and scope can help signpost users as to like what they're going to get out of this, right? And make sure that they don't get overwhelmed. Um, and so, yeah, we
Mhm.
take like concepts that can be really good on an individual page level of like break up your content into digestible chunks, and we can start applying that on a greater scale of like the system of our documentation.
Right.
Um, the kind of more single purpose our pages are, the more clearly someone will be able to follow along, and that's huge.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah, I was going to show in our sidebar how I had been working on this, but this is
Mhm.
actually a 2 months old version. Our prod docs, we're about to release a new set of docs like today.
Mhm.
And so there are all
Right.
these changes that actually I have already made because I kept looking at this, I was thinking, why didn't I do this? Oh, I did. We just can't see it yet.
Mhm.
Yeah, yeah. So that's been a huge help to me. This diataxis method,
Absolutely.
um, even for my own sake, like while writing the docs, like the accessibility of writing them even,
Yeah.
because it just helped me keep the information chunked. I mean, there's like chunking information on a page, and then there's sort of chunking an entire universe in your head
Mhm.
to get it onto a page, if that makes sense.
No, absolutely,
Yeah.
right? And I don't think we talk about often enough the like importance of accessibility in authoring the docs themselves, right?
Mhm.
Because again, like this meta level of there are disabled people at every point in the process, right?
Right.
We can't assume that docs readers won't be disabled. We also can't assume that docs authors won't be disabled, right? So
Right.
how do we simplify the process for that? How do we
Mhm.
ensure accessibility at every step along the way is
Right,
also
right.
so key.
Yeah, circling back to that internal accessibility,
Mhm.
within a company, for sure.
Absolutely.
So a question that I have asked myself repeatedly,
Mhm.
if you don't mind,
Yeah.
is about these I'm gonna close this tab so we can have this one bigger, and I will also so, what is the role of the screenshot in
That's
docs?
it's a good question. I hate to turn this around, but what do you think the role of a screenshot in docs is?
So I don't know. I've actually removed most of the screenshots in our docs because they contained information that either I was going to have to reproduce all the code that existed inside of the screenshot in a code block and then show the screenshot, and then it's like, well, why? Um, or that content was simply going to be inaccessible, and that was incorrect. And so I would just take the content out, take the code out, and we put it in a
Mhm.
code block, and then remove the screenshot. And so then I wonder, do we need to have screenshots ever? Like as a sighted user, I find the screenshots very reassuring because they are showing me that what I have produced
Mhm.
is identical to what is intended to be produced.
Yeah,
But I
it boosts your
that's
confidence, right?
exactly. And so then I think, okay, but I don't want to only boost the confidence of sighted users. I want to boost the confidence of everyone. And so like
Mhm.
how where do you draw the line between the or like draw the line sounds negative, like a decision
Sure.
boundary, I suppose,
Yeah.
um between making things as accessible for the most people as possible
Mhm.
versus okay, at this point I am abandoned, like I've done everything that I can for low vision users,
Mhm.
and I'm now either choosing to restrict everyone to what I have been able to do for low vision users, or I can keep going with this screenshot and then that helps even more people.
Sure.
Or there's
So
something I'm missing that would actually be better for everyone, which would be the best.
I think what you're saying is very valid. And uh, yeah, so it depends a lot on like what's in the screenshot, right? If
Mhm,
you were taking a screenshot of just a snippet of code, don't do a screenshot for that, right? Like have that be pure text. That is
mhm,
better for literally everyone. And folks will be able to highlight it. They'll be able to copy paste it if they want. Screen readers will be able to get it out of the box. You'll be able to update it down the road if the code needs to change, right? But
mhm,
that doesn't mean that all screenshots can be removed. In this case, what you're showing me here is a screenshot of an editor, right?
mhm,
There's a flow there, and that flow, sure, you'll you will likely be trying to communicate that flow in text, but you mentioned that uh, it gives you confidence that what you're doing is right because you can see like I'm following the text instructions, and yeah, my experience looks like what I'm seeing in the docs, right?
mhm,
That is helpful for you. If we want to frame it in an accessibility light, think about again folks who might struggle with complex instructions or folks who
mhm,
might struggle with anxiety disorders, right? The
mhm,
extra confidence boost can assure them that they're on the right track, right?
mhm,
So screenshots can be helpful. I think they can also be helpful from a layout perspective and like breaking up content. Again, like, just
mhm.
it's something different. And that
Sure.
that value can't be understated either.
Mhm,
Yeah, the question then becomes like, well, what do we take screenshots of? And screenshots are Mayank actually calls out in the chat. They say like navigating a complex UI, right? Like if you've got a complex flow with multiple steps, you can show each step along the way. Or it's like, hey, I might say, hey, there's this icon in the bottom right corner, but I can supplement that with a screenshot of said icon, maybe even with a
mhm,
helpful arrow pointing to it or something like that. Um,
mhm,
so complex flows or things where it's like text alone might not be entirely sufficient. They can be really supplemented with screenshots, and so there's huge value in that. The
mhm,
question then becomes, what alt text do you do for that? Um, and Absolutely. Like I've seen this on Microsoft Learn. Like I'll put my own company site on blast where like sometimes it'll be like, oh, screenshot of the UI, right? My unc actually calls out similar in the chat. Um Screenshot of the code snippet. And that's usually not very helpful, right? Like
mhm,
with alt text, the goal is to convey what sighted users are getting out of the screenshot. Um,
mhm,
and so in this case, I might have this be something like, uh, it's actually a little hard to tell with the resolution, but screenshot of editor with two panes active. In the left pane, we see blank. In the right pane, we see the code up to this point. Uh,
Okay. Yeah, yeah. So what I have is editor displaying the greeting function above with the test output, hello new suborbital user, which
that's
isn't as
probably
informative
fine, right?
as describing the panes, because that's was going to be my next question, is
Mhm.
I've seen directly conflicting advice about how many words to put in alt text,
Sure.
where some people say just like the bare minimum to convey like whatever is needed from, and that of course is subjective,
Mhm.
but like optimizing for fewer words, and other people
Sure.
saying, imagine if you could not see this picture, or if you like being able to see this picture, you can take in all of these details.
Mhm.
And other people would also like to be able to take in the details,
Yeah.
and I don't know
So
which one of those
that's
is better.
That's really hard. It's really hard. The heuristic I like to use is I like to imagine I'm on the phone with my friend and I'm telling them about a cool picture I found, right? If I said, "Oh, it's a
Mhm.
picture of a guy," right? Then you, my friend Laura, you would go, "What's the like big whoop? Like
Uh-huh.
what's the point, right?" Like, "Oh, you're telling me about this picture of a guy," right? Like that's not in any way helpful to me.
Mhm.
But if I start going on and on about every detail about the picture, you're probably gonna go like, "Ben, stop. I get the point," right? Um,
Mhm.
Imagining telling a friend over the phone about this picture you found, like picturing like a person on the other end, in this kind of context where we're like abstracted, helps you kind of focus on the important things, right? Why am I telling you about this picture over the phone? What
Mhm.
matters to me about this image, is really helpful. Now we're in the world of technical documentation, and in
Mhm.
technical documentation, correctness and exactness are even more important. So you're probably going to be a little wordier in docs alt text than you might be
Okay.
on social media platforms, right?
Uh-huh.
Kind of letting that like
That
teacher
makes
brain
sense.
kick in, right? Like you probably need to be a little more specific, a
Mhm.
little more correct, a little more exact or precise, or whatever adjective you want to use there, to help all students kind of pick up on the intended instruction, right?
Right.
So that's
Yeah.
that's generally the heuristic I would use. But there's still value in screenshots because it
Mhm.
reassures the user. It helps break up the content. But yeah, it does mean that you have to turn around and not be like screenshot of the editor. Like you have to be more
Yeah.
specific than that. There's a reason you're showing this editor screenshot right now.
Mhm.
Um,
I guess it's sort of a similar, decision process as like a gut check, like with the, uh what was I going to say? Oh, with the diataxis method, where
mhm,
we were saying like we use it as like most of the time, this should be how we like the document should fall into exactly one of
yeah.
these four categories and not straddle it. But every once in a while, it'll make sense. And so I think maybe that's kind of where I've fallen, and maybe that you've reassured me that that's sort of the right mindset
Mhm,
of sort of a most of the time don't use a screenshot, but every once in a while, there are reasons why a screenshot can convey more information to more people in a way that is necessary, and that we can just sort of pick up the
mhm.
slack as best we can with the alt text, and that we can be wordier with the alt text for technical writing than we would for maybe social media type posts.
Right.
That makes
And
sense.
Sarah wants to know, might some of these screenshots be considered decorative? For instance, if the surrounding text is click the start now button in the upper right corner, and the screenshot only like demonstrates said button, like exactly as described in the text. Um, like, should we consider the alt text, or sorry, should we consider the screenshot like purely supplemental and decorative and not providing any information of its own, right? In which
Mhm.
case, you would use alt equals the empty string. Which indicates to assistive technologies such as screen readers, hey, this is purely decorative and serves no informational context, so don't let it clutter screen reader announcements.
I didn't know that.
So,
Oh,
okay,
that's excellent.
so
I'm making a
use with
note.
care, use with care,
Of course.
because this leads into, as developers and technical writers, we assume images are decorative far more often than they actually are, because
Hmm.
images can convey, you know, uh, a lot of context. They can convey tone as well. And so generally, when it comes to like images, like screenshots in particular on documentation, I would err on the side of like make sure all your screenshots have alt text, right? I would
Hmm.
err on the side of assuming that this is not decorative, but you can do this. I also want to call out on the whole decorative thing. Alt equals the empty string is distinct from not providing an alt attribute. So alt, if you don't provide the alt attribute, then the screen reader will like basically treat the image's like file name, like the source attribute, as the alt text. And so it'll be reading, like slash images slash 16119 dash final.png or whatever, which
Hmm.
isn't helpful to anyone. Um,
Right.
so you explicitly have to set alt equals to the empty string. Um,
Hmm.
so
So would
um,
I potentially use alt equals the empty string for things like I've put alt text on like our logos, for instance.
So that's an interesting question. And
Mhm.
here the logo image is serving, it's very functional, right? Because probably if you click that logo, does it take you to the homepage?
Oh,
Right.
for sure.
So it's a
But
link.
this one does not say
Okay. So
this.
the link logo in the upper left, it's functional,
Mhm.
right? The image is part
Yep.
of a link. And so the image alt text, this is kind of a special context where you would want it to indicate where the link would take you. So
Mhm.
opinions differ here. I would set alt equals suborbital. End of story, right? Like just that. Um,
Mhm.
Other folks would say suborbital logo. Other folks might even say
That's what I
home.
went with, yeah.
Um,
Okay.
I would just say suborbital. That's personally all I think you need.
Okay.
Um, in the case of like this homepage, um, yeah, I might even just say suborbital here, but it's accessibility can be very contextual at times, and this is one of those things. Um,
Mhm. Oh, I love this.
mhm.
From my
Call me
Mayog,
image.
please.
Um,
Images slash image blah 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 is my father. Call me
to
image.
call out, if you're familiar with alt text on Twitter, Twitter by default, if you don't supply an alt text, will not use alt equals the empty string. It will use alt equals and
Mm.
then the word image. And so screen reader users will still encounter your images. They'll just be told image, image, which isn't helpful. And even if you know, as the cited author of that tweet, that you put all the important context in the tweet, screen reader users don't know that
Right.
necessarily. And so on Twitter in particular, there is no such thing as a decorative image. Every image should have alt text because there's no way to indicate that an image is decorative. Users
Mhm.
don't know why you haven't supplied alt text, and they're going to assume it's because they're missing out on context.
That makes a lot of sense. Yep.
So, but yeah, so that I think um, the whole screenshot thing, the like images thing, it's such an interesting microcosm of like information architecture and accessibility.
Mhm.
Screenshots are not evil, right? Like we've talked about, like they provide very good functionality, which is reassuring users and breaking up content. But it does mean that you have to pair it with an equally robust alt text strategy. And in technical documentation, you have to be more exact and precise than maybe you would on social medias.
Right.
So,
Yeah. Sure. And then I have another question that isn't actually strictly like a docs type question, but it
yeah.
came up on my personal site.
Okay.
If you don't mind, it could also apply to
Go
docs
for it.
for sure. And that is how does where should uh the links go? So what I wanted to do was have for say this blog post, have the link you could click on the title or the image or the description, and all of
Mhm.
these will take you to the blog post.
Right.
However, when I run, what is it? It's
It's probably going
wave,
to complain
something
that you
like
got
that.
too many things in your, like, especially like block elements
Redundant
inside of your link.
links.
Yeah. This is one of
Redundant
my
links.
favorite
Yeah.
techniques. Um, Can you, in a new page, can you go to pen.new? And this will just give us a code pen that we can work off of. Cool.
Mhm.
In your let's go ahead and recreate this because this is one of my favorite techniques. I adore this and I share this with folks anywhere I can.
Great.
In your HTML, we're gonna have an item, like we're gonna have an element that represents this entire kind of card. I like to use the article element because that refers to like kind of its own self-contained chunk that could be duplicated on multiple pages if need be. So,
Mhm.
yep, article. And let's go ahead and just like close this article tag and we'll work inside it as well. Um, cool. And inside here, let's put a couple of things, right? So we want to have a link that, and probably if you go back to your homepage,
Mhm.
let's talk about from an information architecture bit. What should the link say? Like when you navigate to the link with a screen reader, what should it say?
Um, I would. Uh, hmm. You mean like a description of the link?
So uh, let's figure out what part of this card should be the link as far as screen reader users care.
Mhm.
Um, so probably it would be the title, right? Because
Mhm.
you would want a screen reader user to hear something like link how to blog your projects and
Mhm.
courses, or link how I became a technical writer.
Right.
You The reason why Wave flagged this whole card is because probably the image underneath has alt text, and then
Mhm.
the you've got the like description underneath it, and so screen reader users were hearing link how to blog your projects and courses, image of a hand on top of a like MacBook keyboard with a drink, how
Mhm.
blogging your projects helps you learn and optimize your job search. That's what screen
Mhm.
reader users were probably hearing. Um, and then if you're using voice control, you'd have to recite that whole thing, which would mean you'd have to like know every part that's of the link. Uh, Unwieldy. We don't want that.
Mhm. Right.
So as far as assistive technology is concerned, we probably only want the title to be the link.
Mhm.
And the whole card we want to be clickable, but the real link should just be the title. So
Mhm.
let's go back to our CodePen tab. And let's go ahead and add an anchor tag in there. So and then in here, we'll put like href equals, and let's just go ahead and put a link to like your homepage or something like that in here. So, yep. Uh, Anchor tags have to have an href to be counted as a valid link. So this is important. And let's
Mhm.
go ahead and close this off. Um, yep. And let's put in something like, yeah. And let's put a bit of text in there. Whatever the title of this would be, something to serve as a rudimentary title for this demo.
Mhm.
Yeah. And then underneath it, let's go ahead and put an image.
Mhm.
Let's give it, yeah, a source. And we can maybe copy from the homepage or something like that. Or, yeah, just any image URL will do.
Oh, oops, that's not going to be an image URL. That's going to be the. There we go.
All right.
Mhm.
Uh, yep. Uh, yeah, we can absolutely prettify this later, but you're gonna want to add some alt text, right?
Mhm.
That's important. So let's say alt equals, and we could spend more time thinking about this, but um, perhaps woman uses MacBook on her lap whilst holding coffee or something like that. All right, and then after that, you're going to want to close this image tag. So yep. And
Oops.
then let's put a quick paragraph of some text underneath it.
Oh, right. Oh, I don't remember with HTML. Do I? Yeah, there it goes. Okay. Okay. Mhm.
Uh, sorry, I think you just closed that. with an angle bracket, but the alt needs to be part of the image.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
I don't work in HTML super
Hang on.
often,
Can
so
you sorry, can you zoom in the resolution? I'm struggling a
of
bit with the
course.
resolution of this screen share. Okay. Cool. Yeah, so you're gonna wanna get rid of that left angle bracket right before alt. Yep.
Okay,
And then
that
yeah,
makes more
cool.
sense.
Yep. And then yep.
And you said a
Now you're gonna put
paragraph?
a quick paragraph tag, yeah. And let's just put some stuff in here, real quick and easy stuff.
Okay. Mhm.
Yeah. And let's go ahead and put just a bit of text. It could be gibberish if you want. Doesn't matter. Nice. All right. Uh, and really just to hit home some of these things. If you go into the CSS, let's just kind of prettify some of this real quick. Can you select for the image tag? So IMG and then yep. And in here, let's just put width is 20 ch. And you'll want a colon.
Oh, right.
Yep. Yep. This will help our image be a little more reasonable. There we go.
Commas or semicolons in CSS? I can't remember.
It's semicolons.
Okay,
Um,
thank you.
and then on the next line, let's go ahead and do display block. This will put it on kind of its own line. Sorry, display colon block.
Mhm.
That should, there we go. All right. Cool. Up next, after these image styles, let's go ahead and select for article, and we'll just give us a nice quick border. So that'll be border colon 1px.
Mhm.
Yeah, and we'll see if that does it. If that doesn't do it, we can put solid and black after 1px. Yeah, let's go ahead and do that. So border 1px solid black, no commas, just spaces. There we go. There we go. All right.
Mhm.
So this is not pretty by any means, right? But what we want is we want this whole article, this article representing our card, we want this whole thing to be clickable. And we can use some CSS magic called pseudo selectors for this.
Oh,
And so this, have you ever done anything with pseudo selectors
no.
or pseudo elements? Okay.
Mm-mm.
This is going to be a lot of fun. So go ahead and let's use the selector article and then
Okay.
space and then A.
That
And
means we're
then
selecting both classes, right? Articles
you're
and
selecting all
anchors?
you're selecting all A tags inside an article tag. Yeah.
Oh, it's
Um,
inherited. Okay, cool.
um, and we're actually going to do a bit more. So if you put your cursor directly after that A, um, you're going to do colon colon after. And this
Mhm.
is going to get every element has what's called a before pseudo element and an after pseudo element. And this lets you kind of inject extra stuff. It's weird, it's fun, it's bizarre. We're going to have a great time.
Okay.
And so inside here, um, let's go ahead and do content colon, and then you're going to do some empty quotes
Okay.
and semicolon. And
Mhm.
then I always have to remember how this goes. Position absolute. So that's position colon absolute.
Mhm.
Semicolon. Yep. Um, and I just want to show you that this thing is working, and it won't work straight away. But just to demonstrate this,
Okay.
go ahead and do background color. So that's background dash color.
Mhm.
And here we're going to do RGB and then parentheses. I'm going to introduce you to some of the newer color syntax. So let's do 0 space 255. So no commas. No commas here.
Oh.
We're doing some new syntax
Oh,
here.
just spaces. That's
Yep.
what you said, and I just was carrying straight on out of muscle memory here. You said 0, 3 zeros, and then 255, was it?
It's 2 zeros followed by a 255. So basically, we're setting blue to max is what we're doing here.
Okay.
And then space. So still inside the parentheses, you're going to do like right after the 255. Yep, space slash, and then space, and then 0.3. And this will set it to 30% opacity. So it's pure blue, 30% opaque.
Okay.
And we won't see this quite yet because we're going to need to
Mhm.
do some magic first.
Mhm.
So then in your article, so if you go back to the article, so like after line 7, sorry, of your CSS,
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
Mhm.
Yes. You're going to now do position relative. And so what we've done here is we've set the anchor tag, or rather the anchor tag's after element to basically treat its dimensions relative to the article element. That's how position relative and position absolute work. It's like now
Okay.
the anchor tags after pseudo element is basically like looking to the parent article for its dimensions and placement.
Mhm.
And one last bit of magic inside your article A after. Can you do inset colon 0? I think this should work. If this works, everything's blue, right? We added that blue
Yay.
just so you can see where it is. So if you now mouse over that blue card you've got,
Mhm.
what do you notice about your cursor?
It turned into a clicky finger.
Yeah. In fact, if you look in the bottom left of your browser, it tells you that you're going to go to lauralangdon.io, no matter where you put your cursor in this card, right? But
Mhm.
we know that the link text is Laura Langdon's site, right? But the link clickable area, the hitbox, this expands to the entire article now, right?
Uh-huh.
So we could
Awesome.
now comment out that background color or remove it, and the whole thing would be clickable. Uh,
Mhm.
you'll need to get rid of the background color. Yeah, there you go. So the whole
Mhm.
card is still clickable. You could style it
Mhm.
however you want, but now the link stretches across this entire card. Um,
Awesome.
it's really cool. I love this technique.
Mhm.
But I kind of hammer this home because like we can have really accessible experiences without compromising on our semantics, on our HTML,
Mhm.
making sure that everything is still marked up in the way that like screen reader users can benefit from. Because the technique that you probably had was probably just wrapping the whole card in an anchor tag and calling it a day, right? But
I
that,
tried that. That was the second thing I tried
Mhm.
because I was
Yeah.
hoping it would create this. It did not.
Mhm.
No.
Um, so yeah, this is a very fun technique. I'm a big fan of
Mhm.
this. Some caveats here. You should not have a whole card be clickable if you're going to nest a like individually clickable thing inside of it. Like if your
Sure.
card had a button, the whole card should not be clickable because then you're like nesting clickable entities, which can be
Right.
inaccessible. Um,
That
but
makes sense.
uh, documentation needs to have a very strong foundation of semantic markup. We're using elements in the ways that we want
Mhm.
to make sure that like the experience is still workable for screen reader users and users of other assistive technologies. Um, so yeah, this allows this kind of nice experience of the whole thing can function like a card. Function like a link. The whole card
Mhm.
can, but really only the link is the link, which is super nice.
Right.
Um,
Ah, that's fantastic. Thank you so much.
yeah. And I think that this can benefit documentation sites a lot. In fact, tell you what, I'll put my own site, my own company's
Oh, wonderful.
project on. If you open up a new tag and go to learn.microsoft.com, so this is what I work on. Um, this is Microsoft's developer documentation,
Mhm.
and if you click on, there's a link that says View Documentation. It's under Find Technical Documentation.
Mhm.
Um, Yeah, you click that. Just go ahead and click one of these products. We're just gonna. Oh wow, several layers deep apparently. Just go ahead and click one of these, perhaps.
Okay.
Um, yeah. So these cards, I believe, should follow like the same CSS that we just did, right? They should. Maybe they're not.
Don't think so.
Okay, well, let me find a page that does do it. We're trying to incorporate that pattern a little more often, so
Hmm.
it's not quite universally applied. But for whatever reason, my browser's being really slow today. Let me open it up in a different tab, different browser. Interesting. But anyways, yeah. So these are
It
there we
is too
go.
on the Azure. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So we're using that same technique, right?
Hmm.
We've got slightly prettier styles than you and I did in our code pen, but
Sure.
making sure that like this experience that folks have indicated they like, and it is nice to bump up the hit area for cards, in
Hmm.
particular, because not everyone is able to be as precise with a mouse. Um,
Hmm.
or if you're on mobile and you have like Parkinson's, for instance, right?
Hmm.
Having a small hit area can be a huge problem. So
Right.
in this case, we're strategically expanding the hit area for certain elements that, roughly we feel like if you're clicking in this card, it's because you want, to see what app service looks like, stuff like that.
Hmm. Hmm.
So
That makes a ton of sense. Oh, I love this. Hooray.
yeah. So
I'm afraid I'm enjoying this so much, but I am going to have to wrap us up because I have a plane to catch.
all right.
But thank you so much, Ben, for all of this information. And thank you to everyone who has joined us today. This has been so fun and informative, which is the best of all the worlds.
Well, thank you so much for having me, Laura. It's always fun to chat about these kinds of things, and especially to hear it from the perspective of someone who's involved in the technical writing is
Hmm.
so valuable, right? So just yeah, where possible, if I can summarize, right? Like we want to make sure that we're building things in a very systemic like way, right? Like accessibility is a continual process, and so you have to build it in as a continual process that has to start very early on. um, and yeah, accessibility like is gonna change a lot about how you view like architecting your docs, so that you're focusing on easily digestible chunks that clearly signal to the user where they are. But yeah, absolutely, just this kind of stuff is fun, and always a continual evolutionary process.
Right, right. Yes. And thank you to everyone for your patience. This is only the second time I have ever hosted a stream, and so I'm still getting the hang of looking at the comments and doing things and
I genuinely wouldn't have
not
known. You did great.
losing it. Oh, wonderful. Thank you. I'm afraid I accidentally ignored some of the comments. My bad. I will work on it. All right. So thanks again to everyone. And oh, would you like to drop some links, Ben, for where people can
Sure.
find you?
Um, I'm
Oh, I guess
sometimes on
only I
Yeah,
can.
I'm
Oh
sometimes
no, you
on
can't on
Twitter
Twitter.
these days. I am sometimes on Mastodon these days. Let me get that Mastodon link in there. And
Just
then
like
I
those
also
days.
stream. I'm on kind of an indefinite hiatus right now, just kind of rebuilding energy, reconstituting the plan for the stream. But you should follow at Semantics Dev on Twitch, and that
Mhm.
way, when I pick that back up, you'll be the first to know.
Yay! All right. Thanks again, and see y'all sometime soon. I hope.
Bye, y'all.
Okay. Bye.